See if I could do anything about this camera. Get a little closer. There we go. And it appears we are live. Forgive the lighting. Got the sun going down here, so we're getting these the long shadows coming across the page. Usually why I wait until a little bit later to stream. And always limits my time is because the lighting is always like this. It's the classic problem I always ran into. Anyways, welcome. I'm G. Mr. Drew, here to welcome you to another episode of the Andrew Glowczewski Experience. And we are going to continue with what I started yesterday, just doing some, if I just alt this, for like a few minutes, I was doing these studies of the Bayonetta concept artist's work, and really breaking down these costumes, you know, bit by bit, and just trying to see what goes on and how they go about making these things. And you know, it's something I always knew I was going to end up doing, so to do it now. There we go. Now, something I've been wondering is if I want to draw these things bigger. You know? Since these are all just sketches, I'm kind of going through them quickly. But whatever. Yeah, that may not work out. Should put the shoe there like I was thinking. So interesting that the shoe has this kind of layered design, almost looks like a almost like a yacht, like a boat. It kind of folds in on itself all the. And see, this is the part where the weird stuff kind of kicks in with these designs. Is it looks like this little bat wing is coming off of the legging of the boot.
Like Bo says, you keep the lights on in the fridge, so the fridge is full.
Which, you know, you would never see.
From everyone here at Nerd Soup, I'd like to thank you guys for your continued support. If you're interested in joining the ranks of our Patreon supporters, head over to patreon.com/nerdsoup and check out the rewards we offer to our patrons. We recently dropped some new stuff.
You would never see in like regular clothing. I mean, in order to get something like that, it's got to be completely tailored. And the thing with
we've also got t-shirts, mugs, behind-the-scenes videos showing how we bring our videos to life. And once again, thank you to all our Patreon pledgers who have been supporting us throughout the years. Without you, we wouldn't be able to convert all your pledges into cryptocurrency. So thank you from my future self for making us rich.
Was forging a pure evil Aku explained. Whether or not
all right.
you like Samurai Jack, you have to admit that this animated series on
So yeah, it's just weird. This wing stems out from the sole of the boot or the heel here, the wedge, whatever you want to call it.
It told the story of the notorious shape-shifting wizard Aku,
Holy
an evil
shit.
entity symbolizing darkness. Its constant confrontation
Why is the volume
with
so
Jack
high?
always kept the series exciting. Overall, we had 4 seasons back in 2011. Later, the show was resumed for a final season. But this time, the tone
All
was
right.
way darker than before. Coming back to the mighty villain Aku, there was clearly something that distinguished him from the other villains in fiction. Yes, we all hated him, but at some point we could also relate to him.
So it's like the wing is attached to, like, from the Achilles here down the heel and then to the actual sole of the wedge. And it's just like little bits of fashion like that'll never, pretty much never exist in real life. It's like super tailored.
Please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small clip for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Aku, the Deliverer of Darkness origin. The origin of Aku is best explained in a couple of episodes towards the later parts of Season 3. In episodes 37 and 38, titled The Birth of Evil, we get to know how Aku came to exist in the first place. Let us take you through these intriguing episodes to give you a better idea. The Birth of Evil Part 1. A great black mass of emptiness started to form in space, and it showed signs of consuming the entire universe. It demanded a special response from the 3 ancient gods, and they acted accordingly. Rama, the avatar of Vishnu, a supreme deity of Hinduism, Ra, the sun god of ancient Egypt, and Odin, the king of Norse gods, emerged from a star. They got together, and a fierce battle followed, where this giant black mass was eventually destroyed. However, unknown to them, a tiny fragment managed to slip away, and it drifted away into space. Since then, aeons have passed. Suddenly, the fragment of black mass crash lands on Earth. It ends up in Japan, and the impact of the crash possibly causes the extinction of the dinosaurs. The mass then proceeds to develop into a giant pool of black, tar-like liquid, and it even absorbs a few dinosaurs that managed to survive the apocalypse. It then shows signs of spreading, and tree-like spikes are formed along the ground around it. This deadly black pit continues to expand, and in the course of time, several animals and people fall prey to its insatiable hunger. We now move forward in time to a monarchical Japan, and by now, the dark mass has expanded so much that the human civilization on the borders is being threatened. Even houses close to the imperial palace are being impaled by the giant spikes of darkness, and the emperor realizes that the kingdom cannot rest easy until the threat is destroyed. His pregnant wife is scared to let him go. He makes her understand that without this evil force eliminated, nobody will ever be safe. He is a duty-bound emperor who cares for his people, and he wouldn't take such an invasion without a fight. The emperor gathers his best men and rides into the region that houses the dark entity. He is carrying an elixir of poison that should end the tyranny of evil. The ride to the center of the region proves to be perilous. Deadly spikes sprout from the ground, and all the emperor's men are killed. He continues to ride ahead bravely and ultimately reaches the center of this evil force. He uses the poison on an arrow and shoots it into the sky.
Yeah, another thing that was interesting.
Lands in the black pit. For a while, we think that the job has been done.
I mean, aside from like her cleavage, obviously, is it looks like these little collar plumes
takes the form of a scary creature with giant horns and flaming eyebrows. The creature is massive, and his structure seems to be made up of a black void of emptiness. This is Aku, the embodiment
kind of stem
evil. He seems to be invincible, and the best efforts of the emperor to
from her
destroy him
cleavage. It was like a design thing that I noticed with Viper, G Viper, D Viper, Viper D, whatever that chick's name is in Street Fighter 4.
As punishment for daring to attack him, Aku traps the emperor within the trunk of a giant tree and proceeds to destroy his homeland. The emperor watches helplessly as the evil entity starts destroying his beloved palace. The Birth of Evil Part 2. The Emperor's agony doesn't last long because Odin's white horse, Sleipnir, arrives and frees him. Three gods, Vishnu, Ra, and Odin have assembled once again. They appear in the form of three monks and explain to the Emperor about the evil nature of Aku.
And then yeah, it's just like layers in between.
However, the first slash causes him harm, and Aku is rather confused. The Emperor reveals the magical origin of the sword, but Aku only responds with powerful blasts from his eye beams. The Emperor is forced to dodge the beams, but he manages to land another powerful blow.
And much like her thong,
that doesn't help either. He tries to chase and hunt down the Emperor.
right over here is the same little bat-like.
Is not serious enough to kill him. He merely changes into a spider form and knocks away the Emperor. We get a glimpse of the true powers of Aku when he explodes in a mass of black goo and uses all the weapons and armors of the fallen soldiers. He becomes an entire army all by himself, and he surrounds the Emperor. These versions of Aku attack the Emperor, but they are all cut down one by one. Eventually, Aku understands that these attacks would not be enough to bring down the Emperor.
Yeah, the only thing
The Emperor uses
is like
sword to stab
if
him,
it
and
collars around
he then shoves the sword
the
into
back of
ground,
her head
and Aku turns into a
or around
tree
her
and
neck, you
flies
know.
to come back again. It is
Like a-
seemingly a happy ending, but we already know that the evil antics of Aku don't end here. The Emperor goes back to his wife, and he is delighted to see his newborn son. However, he continues to be wary of the evil force and tells his wife that Aku could return any time in the future. While we get to know about this origin story so deep into the series, showed us the devilish powers of Aku. What we did not know about his backstory back then, the opening episode starts off with the solar eclipse,
And then yeah, just the
and
big
strange
shoulder.
impact on the tree that Aku would turn into. This dry tree
Shoulder
in the
stuff
middle of the
and her
wasteland
cleavage
springs
right
back to life.
here.
We see the towering
Sort of
figure being
flower.
Aku. He reveals that he is sick free
It's like she has like a
once again,
brooch or
and he will
whatever.
continue to devastate the world just
Like a
like he
flower
used to in his
kinda.
past. On the other hand, we see an emperor telling his son a breathtaking foretell. This demon named Aku had risen from the pits of hate. The Emperor was still young back then, and he tried his best to fight the mighty demon. Ultimately, with the help of the three monks, he managed to put an end to the menace of the demon with a magical sword. A lot has changed about the world since then. People are filled with hope, and they are starting to forget about the nightmarish attack of Aku back in the day. But the Emperor is still wary of such a possibility, and he advises his son to never have his guard down. The young prince is impressed with such a thrilling story, and he goes on to play fight with a wooden sword. Suddenly, there is a strange shadow over the land, and Aku breaks his way in through the palace walls. Laser beams from his eyes cause widespread devastation. Carries him off. Last-ditch attempt, he shouts to his wife that the evil monster has returned. Apparently, they had planned about their way ahead if something like this happened, and the Empress springs into action immediately. She runs off with the young prince and the sword, and they are carried away in a boat. Finally, the prince sails off with the ship. The captain is his guide, and they set off for unknown lands. Throughout his childhood, the prince trains in various parts of the world. He learns stick fighting, wrestling, and several other skills. He even heads to the temple of Shaolin for his kung fu lessons. He grows up to be a trained fighter, and at a designated rendezvous, he reunites with his mother. She hands him the special sword of his father, and he trains hard with the sword to free his people from the evil Aku. By this time, the people of this land have been enslaved, and the entire countryside has been destroyed. meets his father, and he promises that the magical sword would be enough to get the better of Aku. However, his wise father warns him about the strengths of Aku and advises him to be on his guard against the abilities of the evil lord to use deception. The prince heads for a showdown with Aku and challenges him to a fight. Initially, Aku is amused by this challenge from a mortal, but it doesn't take him long to recognize the sword and the true heritage of the prince. He turns into a gorilla and viciously attacks the prince. He then changes into a scorpion, but the prince fights defiantly and claims that evil forces can never defeat righteousness. Later, Aku tries attacking him in the form of an octopus.
Yeah, I imagine this one probably just had too much bat stuff going on.
Finally, Aku transforms into a goat and then a bird. But none of his efforts do much damage to the prince. Aku is trapped within the sword once again, and this time he is reduced to a shadow. However, there is still some hint that this is not over yet. All of a sudden, Aku sends the prince into a distant future using a time portal, and in this futuristic world, Aku is the ruler of the planet, establishing his reign of evil. This begins a non-stop quest where Aku tries to decimate the prince, and the prince continues to fight back and tries to get back to his own time. Inspiration of Traveling Samurai comes from Frank Miller's 1983 limited series Ronin. When the final episodes of the show were aired in 2004, many were disappointed with an incomplete ending. The fans hoped for a subsequent season, and their wait was made worse due to no specific statement regarding the same. The makers never officially canceled the season, and it went on in indefinite coma for several years after season 4. But have you ever wondered how a single show is a unique blend of so many different things? This was a story of a samurai who had time traveled and was dropped into a post-apocalyptic future. Yes, you could say the similarities are a bit too close for comfort, but when execution is this awesome, nobody seems to mind. The voice of Aku passed away in 2006. Not many knew that the legendary voice behind the iconic character of Aku is that of Mako Iwamatsu. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2006, and for the 5th season, Greg Baldwin had to fill in his shoes. While Greg did a decent job, Mako was simply made for this role. You might have also seen him in RoboCop 3, the Coen films, and essaying the role of Splinter in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. His legacy will live on because the popularity of the series has showed no signs of slowing down. Samurai Jack was nominated for 6 Primetime Emmys. We have already mentioned how insanely popular the show was. It doesn't come as a surprise that such quality of content was also nominated for as many as 6 Primetime Emmy Awards. The show won 4 out of the 6, and it simply went on to show that even the critics and the Academy voters loved the thrill. Besides the Primetime Emmy Awards, it also won several Annie Awards and the Ottawa International Animation Festival Award. We were glad that the 5th and final season maintained the standards of the show, and it was a fitting goodbye to the classic series. It is not common to see such extensive lore being formed around an animated series in today's time. Hope something half as good comes up in the future. If you haven't already, have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.
Oh shit.
Alt
Shift X actually released a video. It's been a hot minute.
Game of Thrones author George Martin said he likes Tyrion Lannister. Tyrion is the villain, of course, but there's nothing like a good villain. The first few seasons of the Thrones TV show are a pretty close adaptation of the books. Tyrion is a
Hey, do we
smart,
have some,
funny
give me a
person who
sec.
uses his wits in politics, but feels rejected and unloved. When he's condemned for a crime that he didn't commit, he kills Tyrion joins Daenerys because he believes she will make the world better. He tries to help her take the throne without killing innocent people, Cersei and Jaime. But Tyrion's plans all fail.
Since I gotta keep this page dry, let me
His Cersei deal fails, and his plan for King's Landing fails when Daenerys burns the city. Tyrion used to be a smart and ruthless political player, but he spends most of the last 2 seasons just standing around looking sad and helpless. In the finale, he tells Jon to kill Dany, and he says Bran should be king, and then everything's sort of okay in the end. Tyrion's story was about his use of political power and his need for love and family. But the ending of the show doesn't resolve these things. He fails politically, but still gets power. And his family dies, and no one loves him, but he's just kind of okay still. He doesn't change or grow as a character in the show, and he barely impacts the story apart from the last 30 minutes. The final line of dialogue in Game of Thrones is Tyrion telling a joke, but we don't hear the punchline, which is a good metaphor for Tyrion's story. There's a great setup in the first few seasons, but there's no punchline, no emotional payoff in the end. Because Tyrion in the show is not the real Tyrion Lannister. In the books, his story is very different and much darker. After killing Tywin and Shay, Tyrion is traumatized and angry. He doesn't want to protect Cersei and Jaime. He wants to kill his siblings for revenge. And he doesn't want to protect innocent people. He wants to bring fire and sword to Westeros. He thinks of himself as a vengeful ghost coming to haunt the Seven Kingdoms. They would not love me living, so let them dread me dead. So what is Tyrion's story in the books, and is Tyrion Lannister a villain? Tyrion in the books looks very different to Peter Dinklage in the show. Book Tyrion is ugly. He has a brutish, squashed-in face. He's described as grotesque, like a gargoyle. His hair is pale blonde, and his eyes are 2 different colors, one
I wonder
green
if just
and one black. When Tyrion is wounded in battle, he doesn't just get a cool scar, half of his nose is cut off, leaving his face hideously disfigured. And Tyrion's ugliness is important because it's part of why people reject him and see him as a monster. One of the inspirations behind Tyrion's character is Richard III, who was a king of England in the Wars of the Roses. In histories and literature, Richard was portrayed as a devious villain who killed his family to gain power. And supposedly, Richard was ugly and deformed with a hunchback. His evil soul was reflected in an ugly, twisted body. Modern historians doubt whether any of that was true about Richard, but the point is that because of Tyrion's ugly appearance, people are prejudiced against him. Tyrion was rejected from the day he was born. Tyrion's father, Tywin, was always proud and ambitious, but Tywin's father, Lord Typhos, was weak. His lords mocked and laughed at him to his face. Young Tywin hated the humiliation and shame that this brought to their noble family. So Tywin fought to restore the pride and power of House Lannister, brutally exterminating
what else?
all
Some
families who
like
rebelled
capturing
against
this from like the
Tywin
profile
reloaded
and the
House
back would work.
and the king for Aerys Targaryen. Tywin married his cousin
Pretty much
Joanna, and he loved
this
her
drawing,
deeply.
but
It's said that
from
only
behind
she
and
saw
from the
the real
side.
Tywin beneath his cold, harsh armor. They had twins, Cersei and Jaime. Tywin wanted Cersei to be queen and Jaime a great knight. He dreamed they'd be so strong and brave.
Oh, you know what?
that no
Maybe
one
facing
would
that way
harm
would
them.
make a little more sense.
After the humiliation of his father Typhos, laughter was what Tywin hated most. But then, Joanna died giving birth to Tyrion, an ugly, malformed dwarf. King Aerys mocked Tywin and said Tyrion was a punishment from the gods, that they took Tywin's beautiful wife and gave him a monster to teach him humility. The small folk called Tyrion Lord Tywin's Doom. So Tyrion's birth hurt the 2 things Tywin loved most. It undermined the pride and dignity of House Lannister and caused the death of his beloved wife. So Tywin always hated Tyrion and was cold and cruel Cersei copied her father and also hated Tyrion. The only immediate family who showed Tyrion any affection or respect was his brother Jaime.
Yeah, so
Jaime
the arm
gave
was
him toys
there.
and taught him to ride a pony, and Tyrion loved and trusted Jaime more than anyone. He also liked his uncles, Tigert and Gerion. Gerion taught Tyrion about the wonders of the world and taught him acrobatics like flips and walking on his hands. But Tywin hated Tyrion acting like a fool and being laughed at, so he stopped the acrobatics. Tywin also refused to let Tyrion travel with Gerion, and instead put Tyrion in charge of the drains and cisterns at Casterly Rock. So Tyrion had a lonely childhood, finding comfort in books about history and dragons. Rejected by his father and his sister, and with no mother, Tyrion desperately wanted to
Yeah,
be
and the
loved.
belt is around here.
When Tyrion was 13, he met a common girl called Tysha. They fell in love and got married, happily living as husband and wife for 2 weeks. But when Tywin found out, he was furious that Tyrion had shamed House Lannister by marrying an unworthy woman. Jaime told Tyrion that Tysha was a whore, that Jaime paid Tysha to be with Tyrion, and that she didn't really love him. To teach Tyrion a lesson, Tywin had Tysha raped by his guards. Then he made Tyrion rape Tysha, and the marriage was ended. So the one time that Tyrion fell in love with someone, he learned that that love wasn't real. He was betrayed, humiliated, and forced to violate and dehumanize his wife. Ever since Tysha, Tyrion believed that no woman would ever truly love him, that they'd only want him for his gold. So Tyrion turns to sex workers and wine. But Tyrion says that while whores will fuck you, they won't kiss you. He craves real intimacy and approval and a place in the world. He's not a warrior like Jaime. He doesn't have power like Tywin. He's not feared or loved. But he is smart. He's good at strategy and manipulating people. So Tyrion reads lots of books. He says
Ooh.
his mind is his weapon, and his wits are all he has. When Tyrion is about 25 years old, Book 1 begins. He goes up to Winterfell with King Robert and the rest, and he makes friends with Jon Snow. In the books, Tyrion does an acrobatic jump and somersault here, which author George Martin later said he could have left out because it's kind of silly. But Jon feels like an outcast for being a bastard, just like Tyrion feels rejected for being a dwarf. So he gives Jon advice. He says, when people make fun of you and call you names, you should take that name and make it your armor. So, like when people mock Tyrion and call him the imp, Tyrion takes on the persona of a sarcastic, cynical imp. He uses jokes and irony as a shield to deflect the hurt of rejection, and he uses his sharp tongue to make fun of people back. Tyrion slaps Joffrey for being a dick. He stands up for Jon against the bullying Alliser Thorne and defeats Alliser in a mighty duel with a crab fork. Tyrion gives Bran a special saddle design so he can ride a horse after his injury. Tyrion has sympathy for cripples, bastards, and broken things. He identifies with underdogs and outcasts. But Tyrion can also be cruel and vindictive, even in small ways. Like, he dislikes Benjen Stark, so Tyrion takes Benjen's warm clothes to make Benjen cold, just out of petty spite. When Catelyn captures Tyrion, he plots revenge on all her men. He especially hates the singer Marillion for making fun of him. So when they're attacked, Tyrion stomps on Marillion's hand and breaks his fingers, just because he's annoyed by this guy's singing. Lysa falsely accuses Tyrion of murder, and it's easy to frame Tyrion because he's an ugly imp and people are biased against him. But Tyrion escapes using his wits and his words. He convinces Bronn and the Mountain Clansmen to join him. Tyrion says he'll help the Mountain Clansmen attack the Vale, and in the books, he's serious about this. He plans to reduce the Vale of Arryn to a smoking wasteland. He thinks there's nothing he'd enjoy more than getting revenge on Lysa, except perhaps strangling Cersei. He often fantasizes about killing Cersei and Tywin. Even as a child, he dreamed of burning his sister and father in dragonfire. So From the beginning, Book Tyrion has a dark side that wasn't in the TV show. Being mistreated and disrespected makes him angry, and he wants to pay his debts with violent revenge. Tyrion meets with his father, Tywin, as the Lannisters go to war with the Starks and Tullys. And Tywin fights this war in the most violent and destructive way possible. He orders his most...
See, this is the reason why I wanted to draw from the side. She has these wings that kind of come off of the coat, but it's like, how are they associated in there? Because
He's there when Tywin gives these orders.
the bands going around the top of the boots here are connected to the suit. So unless there's a side seam, I was kind of thinking about it last night after yesterday's stream, like how could it have connected? And I'm wondering if it's like the belt, like let's say there's a belt loop there, and the belt has the wings coming off of it.
Tyrion does hate Tywin, but he's still so desperate for his father's love and approval that he's internalized Tywin's brutal methods and tries to be like him. But no matter how hard Tyrion tries, Tywin just criticizes and humiliates Tyrion, saying he's weak and useless. Tywin's constant nagging makes Tyrion feel insecure, inadequate, and unloved. Tywin orders Tyrion to fight on the front lines of a battle, and Tyrion realizes that his father wants to get him killed. So before the battle, Tyrion feels lonely, and he meets a girl called Shae, who agrees to be his lover in return for gold. Shae is just 18 years old in the books. She's witty and charming, and when they have sex, she acts like she enjoys it and calls him a giant of Lannister. Tyrion knows that she's just pretending to like him, but he's so desperate for love that he wants to believe it's real. In the TV show, Shae eventually does love Tyrion, but not in the books. Author George Martin says Shae doesn't give a shit about...
Yeah, so if it doesn't come off of the belt, the only thing I could think of is if there's a seam and it comes off of like a side seam or something like that. And that's just something that we can't see from, the side, or from, the front angle, which is the only reference I really have to go off of. Like if there's a side seam going up here, then, there's an opportunity to layer it. So you have a layer that comes off and creates the wings coming off of the back, but then a second layer underneath that continue down to create the legging.
Not to bring his whore, Shae. The talk of whores brings up Tyrion's anger and pain over what Tywin did to Tysha. So Tyrion defies his father and brings Shae to King's Landing. So in Book 1, Tyrion is hurt and angry at a world that rejects him. He wants love and respect and revenge. In Book 2, Tyrion takes power in King's Landing and says he's going to do justice. He gets rid of the corrupt Janos Slynt because Janos's men killed a baby and her mother. Tyrion imprisons and humiliates Pycelle for disobeying him. Tyrion blackmails Lancel Lannister and bribes the Kettleblacks to spy on Cersei. He sends Myrcella to go marry a Martell and makes a plan to free Jaime from the Starks. Tyrion feels very impressed with himself for all his clever political plots. He thinks that he can scheme with any man, that this is what he was made for. But he's not really as successful as he thinks. Like, sure, Tyrion outsmarts Janos and Pycelle and Lancel, but those guys are small fry. The real dangerous players are Littlefinger and Varys, and Tyrion never figures out what they're up to. And many of Tyrion's plots fail. The Kettleblacks were working for Littlefinger all along, not Tyrion. Myrcella's marriage just lets the Martells use her against the Lannisters. Tyrion's plot to free Jaime fails, and Tyrion's insults to Pycelle and Joffrey and the Kingsguard and others just create enemies who turn against Tyrion in the end. So Tyrion is not as clever as he thinks he is, and he doesn't really do justice. Like, sure, he gets rid of Janos, or just makes him Jon Snow's problem, but the person who ordered Janos to kill a baby was Cersei, and Tyrion feels he can't bring Cersei to justice. Tyrion also realizes that his own men, like Bronn, are just as cutthroat and immoral as Janos was. So he admits to
Yeah,
himself
it's
that
interesting.
he
So I
isn't
wonder.
really doing justice. Ultimately, Tyrion works as Hand of the King for King Joffrey, a cruel, incompetent child tyrant. Tyrion knows that Joffrey is a terrible king, and he knows that he isn't the rightful king. Joffrey is a bastard of incest, making Stannis the true king. Tyrion knows that Cersei and Tywin are cruel, terrible rulers, and he knows that their army commits evil atrocities in the Riverlands. A Riverlord says that Lannister soldiers are burning, raping, and killing innocent people, and Tyrion doesn't care. He says that's just war, which is a bullshit excuse. The Starks and Tullys and Stannis don't wage war like that. The Lannisters are exceptionally brutal. In between Tyrion's chapters, we get chapters from Arya's perspective, as she experiences the horror of Lannister atrocities, making it really clear that Tyrion is on the wrong side of this war. All his clever political plots support a brutal, illegitimate government fighting against the heroic Starks and righteous Stannis. Tyrion also mostly ignores the threat of the White Walker apocalypse, even though the Night's Watch repeatedly asks him for help. Tyrion doesn't do justice in Book 2. It's not about the realm, it's about his ego. After a lifetime of being mocked and disrespected, Tyrion loves having power and status. He thinks me, the dwarf, the monster, the one they scorned and laughed at, now I hold it all. The power, the city, the girl, and I do love it. Tyrion's humiliation of Lancel and Pycelle isn't about political strategy. It's about making himself feel powerful, making himself feel tall. Tyrion's feelings of resentment are understandable and sympathetic, but he uses his power to bully and humiliate, to feed his ego, and to fight on the wrong side of this war. That's why Tyrion is the villain in Book 2. Throughout the book, Tyrion struggles for power with Cersei. They're both on Team Lannister. They both want the same things, but they each want the power for themselves. So they undermine and lie and insult and spy on each other. There is one moment when Tyrion and Cersei celebrate and are happy together, but Tyrion uses this opportunity to slip Cersei a mild poison to get rid of her for a few days. And the relationship really breaks down when Tyrion gets between Cersei and her children. Tyrion sends Myrcella to Dorne, he takes Tommen away for safekeeping, and he puts Joffrey in a battle. Cersei feels that her children are threatened, so she retaliates by threatening the people Tyrion loves. She captures a sex worker called Alayate, thinking that she's Tyrion's lover, Shay, and she threatens to torture and kill the girl if Cersei's children are hurt.
Yeah, I
So
wonder.
how does Tyrion react? He could tell Cersei the truth, that she's got the wrong girl, that Tyrion would never hurt her children, that they're on the same side and shouldn't be fighting, but instead Tyrion decides to be like Tywin and to speak with his father's voice. So Tyrion says that if Alyea is beaten and raped, Tyrion will beat and rape Tommen. He promises to hurt Cersei, to turn her joy to ashes in her mouth. This is the moment that Tyrion and Cersei become enemies, and it happens because instead of being honest, half-decent people, they both act like their brutal, ruthless father. Their petty sibling rivalry for Tywin's love spirals into murder, hate, and eventual disaster for their family. Tyrion defends King's Landing from Stannis. He blows up Stannis' ships with wildfire, and in the books he traps the burning ships with a giant chain. We see it from Davos' perspective, as Tyrion's wildfire kills his sons and thousands of others. So, from Davos' perspective, Tyrion totally is the villain. Tyrion leads an attack and fights amidst fiery ships like a badass, but then Tyrion's attacked by one of his own men. Mandon Moore slashes Tyrion's face open, possibly under Cersei's orders, or Joffrey's orders, or Littlefinger's. He has a lot of enemies. But Tyrion goes down, and Tywin and the Tyrells arrive to win the battle. At the end of the book, Tyrion is badly wounded, his face is disfigured, and he's alone. He has fever dreams and visions of the thousands of people he killed in battle, burned corpses weeping and moaning. He thinks, why did I kill them all? And then he dreams the answer. He dreams of a feast where everyone praises him as a hero. Jamie makes him a knight. Shay embraces him, and his father Tywin smiles with approval. This is why Tyrion fought this war. This is why he played politics. It's because he wants to be loved. But in Book 3, Tyrion gets no love. Tywin takes all the credit for winning the battle, and takes Tyrion's power as Hand of the King. Tyrion's allies are replaced and scattered, and Tyrion feels abandoned.
I imagine it'd
So
just be
Tyrion goes to his father and asks for some
starting to. I don't know if it's just the red and blue pencils, but it's starting to look a lot like Kill la Kill type stuff.
Tywin's son and heir. Since Jaime is a Kingsguard, Tyrion should be the next Lord of Castle Rock. But Tywin refuses. He calls Tyrion an ill-made creature, devious, spiteful, and full of lust. He says he'll never let Tyrion turn Castle Rock into his whorehouse. Tywin is angry that Tyrion threatened Cersei to protect Alyea. So Tywin has Alyea whipped and kicked out the city gates naked. Tywin brings up Tysha and Shay and says he'll kill Tyrion's whores. So Tywin's hatred of Tyrion is connected to Tywin's feelings about women and sex, which goes back to Tywin's relationship with his own father, Tytos. Because after Tywin's mother died, Tytos took several common women as his mistresses. One mistress became proud and influential, ordering people around at Castle Rock, and she wore Tywin's mother's clothes and jewelry. Tywin was furious that a low-born woman had power and status in House Lannister and had replaced his mother wearing her clothes. So when Tytos died, Tywin stripped the woman and walked her naked through the streets to show the world she was a whore. Now, Tywin does the same thing with Alyea, and did something similar with Tysha. Because of his daddy issues, Tywin is paranoid about lower-class women undermining his pride and shaming his noble.
And see, this is what I mean.
So he uses
Where do the wings come from? The wings off the back.
humiliation to put women beneath
You know,
the dignity
this little
of his house. That's why Tywin hates the Tyrion
kind
openly
of drag from the
sex
coat.
with low-born women like Tytos did. He hates that Tyrion is mocked and laughed at like Tytos was. Tywin says, I was made to suffer my father's follies. I will not suffer yours. Tyrion reminds Tywin of all his deepest insecurities about his father and women and his grief for his wife. It's not fair or rational, but that's why Tywin hates Tyrion and rejects him so brutally. Tyrion knows that Shay is in danger from Tywin, and that it would be safer to send her away. But she's the only person who makes him feel loved, even though he knows that she's just using him for his money. Shay is not a nice person in the books. She says some cruel things about Lollys, a disabled rape victim. And Tyrion is unkind to Shay sometimes. He slaps her once. He isolates and controls her. He risks the life of this teenage girl for his gratification. And then Tyrion gets in another shitty relationship with a teenager. Tywin tells Tyrion to marry Sansa Stark so that the Lannisters can use her claim to take over the North. And Tyrion has mixed feelings.
See, it's almost like maybe it comes off of his back.
Because she's just 12 years old in the books. But Tyrion would like to rule Winterfell and get away from his family. Tyrion offers for Sansa to marry Lancel instead, but Sansa remembers that Tyrion was kind to her once, and she hasn't really got a choice anyway, so they both go along with the wedding. Sansa refuses to kneel for the wedding cloak, though, so Tyrion has to stand on the back of a jester. The wedding is humiliating and depressing for them both. Tyrion gets drunk and threatens King Joffrey, and then they go to bed. Tywin told Tyrion to have sex with Sansa to consummate the marriage to secure their claim on the North. And at first, Tyrion intends to have sex with her. But Sansa doesn't want him, so he relents, and they settle into their distant, uncomfortable marriage. Tyrion tries to connect with her, He's so desperate to be wanted, but she doesn't want him because she's 12 and she's a political prisoner, and Tyrion's family killed her family, so their marriage is a daily agony. Tywin keeps telling Tyrion to have sex with Sansa, and Tyrion's angry that his father keeps trying to control his sex life. Cena blackmails Tyrion, so Tyrion has him killed and made into soup.
So yeah, maybe the wings come off of the second layer.
As Master of Coin, there are Martells and Tyrells to deal with. His child wife hates him. His dad wants to kill his girlfriend. The Queen hates him. The King hates him. The common people hate him and think he's a twisted little monkey demon. House Lannister is more powerful.
Like right now I have it coming from
Tyrion feels miserable and alone. At Joffrey's wedding, there's a performance
here.
of dwarfs who ride a dog and a pig and joust for entertainment. Joffrey tells Tyrion to ride the pig, and Tyrion refuses, so they get angry and insult each other publicly. Then Joffrey dies of poisoned wine, and Cersei accuses Tyrion of the murder. At the trial, Tyrion has no friends to defend him. Bronn gets bribed by Cersei, and Podrick is just a boy. What Tyrion does have is a lot of enemies. All the people Tyrion threatened and humiliated over the last two books come back to condemn him. And they make a strong case that Tyrion poisoned Joffrey because Tyrion did steal poison and he did threaten Joffrey. He publicly swore to gild Joffrey. Of course, Tyrion didn't really intend to cut off his nephew's penis, just like he didn't really want to hurt Tommen. He only made those threats because he was angry and hurt, and because he thought that acting like Tywin and playing the role of a monster would protect him like armor. But it really doesn't work. Tyrion says he's been on trial for being a dwarf all his life, and it's true that people are horribly prejudiced against him for the way that he looks. But it's also true that Tyrion's villainous behavior, his threats and manipulation and lies, are part of why people treat him like a villain. Finally, Shae testifies against Tyrion after being bribed and pressured by Cersei. Shae says Tyrion is guilty, and she humiliates him by talking about their sex life. This betrayal breaks Tyrion, and all his hatred pours out. He says he wants to poison everyone, that he wishes he was the monster they think he is. Tyrion demands trial by combat, but the Mountain gives Oberyn, so Tywin condemns his son to death for a crime he didn't commit. Before his execution, Tyrion is saved by Jaime, and this is the moment when Tyrion in the show and Tyrion in the books go in completely different directions. Because in the show, Tyrion thanks Jaime and they hug lovingly, then Tyrion leaves. But in the books, Jaime makes a terrible revelation. After Tyrion married Tysha, Jaime had told him that Tysha was a whore, that Jaime paid her to be with Tyrion, and that she didn't really love him. But now Jaime reveals that that was a lie that Tywin made him tell. Jaime didn't pay Tysha. She was just a random peasant girl who really did love Tyrion. All these years, Tyrion thought that no woman would ever love him. But now he finds out that his wife, who was gang raped by Tywin's men and by Tyrion, was the only...
I guess I'm gonna have to do this.
Tyrion is devastated and furious that Jaime kept to this lie. It feels like the ultimate betrayal from the one person Tyrion thought was all Tyrion's pain becomes rage, and he swears to get revenge on his family, to punish the world by becoming the villain that they think he is. He says, "I am the monster they all say."
There we go.
And
Just so I can keep this note.
He says he did kill Joffrey and tells him that Cersei's been cheating on him. So Tyrion leaves Jaime not as a loving brother, but as his enemy, a monster wanting revenge. And it's because of the revelation about Tysha
That way,
Tyrion...
when I look back on this, I don't lose
Tyrion
that these wings came off of the back,
Tywin
like so.
always criticized Tyrion for having sex with whores. He says it's a weakness and a shame on their family. After Tywin's wife died, he supposedly never touched a woman. He had no use for whores. Tywin acted like he had no lust, no emotions, just cold rationality. But now Tyrion sees that's a lie. Tywin does have sex with common women, just like Tyrion. And it's not just Shay. In Book 2, Tyrion uses a secret tunnel that runs into a brothel. Varys says that this tunnel was built for a hand of the king, so that he could visit the brothel secretly. And inside the brothel is a red and yellow window, and a globe of gilded metal and scarlet glass. Those are Lannister colours. And Tywin Lannister was hand of the king, so it was probably Tywin who built this tunnel to visit the brothel on the regular. Tywin even lets Shay wear his jewellery, just like his father's mistress wore his mother's jewellery. So there are some deep, dark, complicated feelings about sex and family and shame going on in Tywin. But the point is that Tyrion discovers that Tywin is a massive hypocrite who does have sex with whores, just like Tyrion does. In the show, when Tyrion finds Shay, Shay grabs a knife and they struggle before Tyrion kills her. Then Tyrion cries and apologizes to the corpse. The
So
show tries to make the scene feel tragic, almost sympathetic to Tyrion.
let's move on.
It's cold-blooded murder. Shay doesn't grab a knife. Shay cries and says she didn't want to betray Tyrion, that Cersei made her, and Tywin scares her. But Tyrion is angry at her betrayal, so he strangles her to death without mercy. Compared to the show, this is a much more cold, brutal murder. Author George Martin calls it Tyrion's blackest deed, the great crime of his soul. Then Tyrion gets a crossbow and finds his noble father on the toilet. He asks Tywin what happened to Tysha. Where did she go after the gang rape? Tywin doesn't know and doesn't care. He says Tysha went wherever whores go. So Tyrion shoots his father. Tywin says Tyrion is no son of mine. But Tyrion says, I'm you writ small, meaning I'm just like you. Because Tywin hated Tyrion for being devious, spiteful, and lustful. But it turns out Tywin is just as devious and spiteful and lustful as Tyrion. Tywin is devious when he plots the Red Wedding. He is spiteful when he had Elia Martell killed and the Brains and Castamere. And he's so goddamn lustful that he roots his son's girlfriend and builds a secret personal sex tunnel to a brothel. Tywin and Tyrion have the same insecurities about being laughed at and feeling weak and ashamed. Tywin tries to hide his feelings behind the image of a noble, cold, golden lion, someone who's above the petty, shameful behavior of his dwarf son. But it's a lie. It's all bullshit, and that's why Tywin dies shitting himself on the toilet. Tywin did not, in the end, shit gold, because he's not a golden lion. He is a deeply flawed man, full of shame and spite and lust, just like his son Tyrion. In Book 3, Tyrion tries to be loved by his family, Shay and Sansa, but he is betrayed and condemned by everyone close to him. So in Book 5, Tyrion goes east, drinking his way across the sea. He is consumed with self-loathing, anger, and despair. He's lost everything. He no longer dreams of love or justice. All he has left is hatred. He wants to kill Jaime and Cersei and bring war to Westeros. He wants to punish the world for rejecting him. And he especially hates women.
Yeah, this one's funky.
Threatens a slave girl, saying he'll
It's like a
have sex with
belt,
her and murder
but a
her
pant
just
leg
for the
and a
pleasure
belt.
of
It's really
making her
weird.
afraid. Tyrion's in a
And then
very
these
dark place, and he reacts to his trauma and pain by hurting others.
rock and roll boots, gun holsters in them.
Tyrion meets Illyrio,
Is very
working with Varys,
generic.
Daenerys conquer Westeros. He convinces
I can see why this one didn't work out.
so that Tyrion can get revenge on the Lannisters and take Castle Rock for himself. So Tyrion travels with a group of Illyrio's allies, led by this guy Griff and this kid, young Griff. There's also a scepter and a scholar and a knight. And Tyrion figures out that Griff and his crew are not who they seem. Griff is actually John Connington, who was once a lord in Westeros, and young Griff is actually, supposedly, Aegon Targaryen, the son of Prince Rhaegar and Elia Martell, who everyone thought was dead. Griff and Illyrio and Varys have raised Aegon to be king. They hope to marry him to Daenerys so that they can
See how this one,
rule Westeros together.
it
So
opens up
we'll travel down
at the
road
chest
and see some wondrous
and then
sights.
closes at the neck. That's basically what I think happened with the first dress. It's just covered by these collars. That you don't see the the dress closing at the neck.
Which is one of George Martin's less subtle metaphors. The Sorrows are a strange and spooky place, said to be ruled by a
Yeah, it's more catsuitish.
shrouded lord. The boat inexplicably, magically goes through the same place twice, and then they're attacked by stone men, people infected with grayscale. Tyrion saves Aegon, John Connington saves Tyrion, and John Con gets infected with grayscale, but keeps it a secret. In the TV show, Jorah gets grayscale, but in the books it's John Con. And the disease makes John Con desperate to make Aegon king of Westeros ASAP, because John Con was in love with Aegon's father, Prince Rhaegar. He feels guilty for failing Rhaegar, and he wants to redeem himself by getting Aegon on the throne. He and his crew have spent years training and protecting Aegon in secret, and now it's almost time to reveal him and claim his birthright. But Tyrion really doesn't give a fuck about Jon Con and Aegon's quest. He makes fun of Aegon's whole story as a perfect, handsome fantasy prince, and he undermines their noble heroism with his sarcasm and cynicism and hate. It's almost meta how Tyrion mocks the fantasy tropes of the story that he's in. Like Rick Sanchez being so depressed and disillusioned and drunk that he breaks the fourth wall a little. Tyrion even dresses in motley like a jester, a villainous fool who makes fun of the world like an edgy Westerosi joker. Tyrion hates Jon Con because he reminds him of Tywin, and Aegon is an annoying, hot-headed teenager, so Tyrion mischievously messes with their plans. Over a game of Savas, which is the Game of Thrones version of chess, Tyrion manipulates Aegon and convinces him to change his plan. Instead of going east and joining forces with Daenerys, he tells Aegon to go west.
Yeah, this one's super basic.
Himself. And since Aegon
You see why this one didn't work out.
Jon Con is impatient with his grayscale, the Mad Lads actually do it. They abandon the plan and attack Westeros without Daenerys. Tyrion doesn't actually think this is a good idea. He only suggests it to mess with them and create chaos. But this decision could have huge consequences. Like, if Aegon takes the throne himself, he and Daenerys could end up becoming enemies instead of allies. There are hints that Aegon is not really a Targaryen. He's actually a Blackfire. And Daenerys is warned of a mother's dragon or false dragon. There are hints of a war between them, a dance of the dragons that will cause death and destruction across Westeros. So Tyrion's trolling might cause a terrible war, and he doesn't care. He laughs when he finds out. In his anger and nihilism, Tyrion wants to see the world burn. Tyrion is haunted by memories of Tywin and Shae and Tysha. Since Tysha was the one woman who truly loved him, he wants to find her again. He imagines them living together in a cottage like they did when they were young and happy. It's not a realistic dream, but that distant memory is all he's got. Tywin said that Tysha went wherever whores go, so Tyrion repeatedly asks, where do whores go? Thinking of Tysha, he visits a brothel, and he has sex with a slave prostitute who has dead eyes and a scarred back. Tyrion feels wretched, full of shame and guilt. He drinks till he pukes, tells the slave to kill him, and then has sex with her again, even though she clearly doesn't want to. He rapes her. But in
Damn.
the TV show version of the scene, Tyrion is charming and nice. A slave offers him free sex, but Tyrion declines because he's so sad in like a noble kind of way. The show whitewashes Tyrion. It takes out the bad stuff he does and makes him into a bland good guy who doesn't change as a character. But the books go deep into Tyrion's emotional devastation, and he does terrible things. Tyrion is captured by Jorah, who wants to give him to Daenerys to get back in her favor, and they go to Volantis, an ancient slave city in a state of political unrest. Because the rulers of Volantis plan to attack Daenerys, because Daenerys is fighting against slavery. But the slaves of Volantis see Daenerys as a beacon of freedom, and the Red Priests preach that Daenerys is the prophesied savior of Azor Ahai. A woman called the Widow of the Waterfront tells Tyrion that the slaves are waiting for Daenerys to come and free them. Tyrion agrees to go and help Daenerys, but not for heroic reasons. He says he'll bring Daenerys his hate, and the only reward he asks for is to be allowed to rape and kill his sister Cersei. Tyrion embraces the role of a monstrous villain. Over in Bravos, Arya is in a play where the Tyrion character says, "As I cannot be the hero, let me be the monster, and lessen them in fear in place of love."
One thing
Then
that does
Tyrion
exist
is
on
attacked
these are the
by a
boots
dwarf girl called Penny.
being
Penny
laced
was
up on the
one of
side
the
here.
dwarves back at Joffrey's
So
wedding,
much
but
lacing.
when Tyrion escaped Westeros, Cersei put a bounty on Tyrion's head. So a bunch of idiot bounty hunters have killed innocent dwarves, thinking they might be Tyrion. Penny's brother, Oppo, was one of those killed, and in her grief and anger, Penny blames Tyrion. Tyrion takes pity on Penny and brings her with him as they sail east. Eventually, Tyrion and Penny reconcile and become friends. They've got a lot in common. They're both dwarves who have lost their families and their ways of life. They're both dealing with grief, anger, and suicidal thoughts. But unlike Tyrion, Penny moves past her anger. She forgives Tyrion for her brother's death, and instead of wallowing in hatred and despair like Tyrion, Penny is optimistic with hopes and dreams for the future. Penny tells Tyrion to stop his self-destructive behavior. Like, Tyrion makes fun of Jorah until Jorah hits Tyrion. And Penny tells him he's got to stop provoking people or he'll get himself killed. It used to be that Tyrion could say what he
Yeah,
liked. 'cause
pretty
he was a
basic.
rich and powerful
I don't even know
lord.
if I
But
really need to
now,
break anything down here. It's
exile
super
is no
simplistic.
more. So when he talks shit, he gets hit. Tyrion has always felt sorry for himself, but he was very lucky to be born into a rich noble family. He's been protected by his privilege all his life. But Penny is a common person as well as a dwarf, and she's learned the hard way how to survive. Tyrion hates being laughed at, but Penny says that making people laugh can be a good thing. In fact, if Tyrion had ridden her pig at Joffrey's wedding like Joffrey asked, instead of insulting Joffrey, Tyrion might never have been condemned, and Penny's brother might still be alive. No one should have to put up with humiliation, but many of Tyrion's problems are caused by his pride. When morale on the ship gets dangerously low, Penny convinces Tyrion to perform a joust with her, riding her pig against her dog. So Penny challenges Tyrion's pride, his privilege, and his self-destructive behavior. She shows him that he's not the only dwarf in the world who's suffered, and that it's possible to forgive and hope. Penny has a crush on Tyrion, and they kiss a couple of times. But Tyrion isn't interested in her like that. The only woman he loves is his idealized memory of Tysha. So Tyrion has a complicated relationship with Penny. He's protective of her, and kind sometimes, but he rejects her love, and he mostly rejects her positive, hopeful attitude. Tyrion stays angry and proud and cynical, and he moves closer to power. A red priest called Maquaro has a vision of Tyrion with dragons. Dragons old and young, true and false, bright and dark, with Tyrion snarling in their midst, a small man with a big shadow. The old dragons could be Aemon or Bloodraven. The young and true dragons could be Daenerys and Jon Snow, who is probably secretly a Targaryen. And the false dark dragon could be Aegon, because he might actually be a Blackfire, not a Targaryen. And through these dragons, Tyrion will have a big impact on the story. In Book 1, Tyrion cast a shadow as tall as the king. Aemon said that Tyrion is a giant come among us, here at the end of the world. So there's lots of foreshadowing that Tyrion will play a big role in the endgame of the story. Their ship is damaged in a storm, Makoro floats off to Victarion, and Tyrion, Penny, and Jorah are captured by slavers outside Meereen. The city is under siege by the slavers of Yunkai, while Daenerys tries to negotiate peace. So Tyrion, Penny, and Jorah are bought as slaves by a Yunkishman called Yezan Quaggas, or the Yellow Whale. Yezan is enormously rich and enormously fat, and he keeps a grotesquerie of slaves with unusual bodies, watched over by his cruel overseer, Nurse. Tyrion has gone from a proud, powerful ruler in Westeros to a powerless, humiliated slave. Inside Meereen, Daenerys tries to make peace with the slavers by marrying Isdar and opening the fighting pits. Tyrion and Penny are made to perform for the crowds, so the first time Tyrion and Daenerys see each other, Tyrion is riding a pig, though she doesn't know he's Tyrion and they still haven't met. Because Drogon crashes the party, Daenerys flies off, and Yunkai prepares to attack Meereen. A disease called the Bloody Flux breaks out, and Yezan...
I wonder if this is all necessary. I should probably just go over it with my white marker.
So pretty soon he's squirting his guts out, and Tyrion takes the opportunity to escape. On the way out, he kills Nurse with some poison mushrooms, and says a Lannister always pays his debts. So after all the crazy stuff that happens in this book, Tyrion is still a Lannister, still proud, spiteful, and murderous like his father. The main way that Tyrion has changed since the start of Book 5 is that he's less depressed now. He doesn't want to die anymore. He originally considered using these poison mushrooms to kill himself in Pentos, but now he chooses to live and get revenge. Tyrion goes to a mercenary captain called Brown Ben Plum, commander of the Second Sons. Tyrion convinces him to let him and Penny and Jorah join his company to escape slavery. And in return, Tyrion promises Ben money and lordship when Tyrion gets power back in Westeros. So Tyrion, Penny, and Jorah escape slavery, but now they're stuck in the middle of a battle between the slavers and Daenerys' forces. Daenerys herself is still missing in the Dothraki Sea, so Barristan commands her army, alongside Grey Worm and the Unsullied, some sellswords, and freed slaves. Ben Plum and the Second Sons are on the side of the slavers, but Tyrion hopes to convince them to join Daenerys instead. So Tyrion's back in the Game of Thrones, playing politics, being a Lannister again, and he is as ruthless as ever. He compares himself to Tywin and thinks about poisoning wells. Tyrion wants to join Daenerys, but not because he believes in her or anything. He just thinks that she's his best hope of bringing fire and sword to Westeros. So in Book 5, Tyrion loses everything and falls deep into despair and hate. But now he's returning to the Game of Thrones. When he gets power, will he use it for violence and vengeance like Tywin would? Or will he find forgiveness and hope like Penny? Author George Martin has released sample chapters of the upcoming next book, The Winds of Winter. In the opening chapters, Tyrion convinces Ben Plum and his men to switch sides and join Daenerys. Another sellsword company called the Windborn also joined Daenerys. Victarion and Makoro arrive with the Ironborn and attack the slavers. The dragons, Rhaegal and Viserion are loose, and Sir Barristan rides into battle. So it looks like Daenerys' forces will defeat the slavers, leaving a very strange bunch of characters in charge of Meereen. Barristan is Daenerys' closest ally, so Tyrion will want to win his trust, though Tyrion suspects that Barristan will hate him for being a villainous kinslayer. Victarion wants to marry Daenerys and steal her dragons, which probably won't end well for him, but if he survives the battle, we could get some fun dialogue with Tyrion making fun of Victorian dumb-as-a-stump Greyjoy. Macquarie could teach Tyrion more about magic and prophecy. Marwyn the Mage should arrive sometime, and he's also into magic and books. Ben Plum and the Tattered Prince will want battle and plunder. Jorah wants to get out of the friend zone with Daenerys, though he's picked up an unfortunate face tattoo recently. Dario is still around, and he wants Daenerys, and Strong Belwas wants liver and onions. It's a colourful collection of characters, and a great opportunity for Tyrion to play politics, crack jokes, rule Meereen, and set himself up as an advisor to Daenerys when she returns. Daenerys won't trust Tyrion right away, because Tyrion is a Lannister, condemned as a treacherous kingslayer. But Tyrion is very good at convincing people to make alliances, and Tyrion has lots of useful information that Daenerys needs. Daenerys has never been to mainland Westeros. She doesn't know her enemies, but Tyrion intimately knows Cersei, Jaime, King Tommen, and other lords. Tyrion knows the defences of King's Landing and Casterly Rock, and Tyrion is the only person in Meereen who knows about Aegon and Jonton. Tyrion can tell her that Aegon is on the way to take her throne, which could convince Daenerys to get to Westeros ASAP. Tyrion might manipulate Daenerys and convince her that Aegon is her enemy to encourage conflict and chaos. So, like in the show, Tyrion will probably become Daenerys' Hand of the Queen, but his advice to Daenerys may be very different to the show. In the show, Tyrion tells Daenerys to be merciful to the Slavers, so instead of killing them all, they just kill some and give the rest a stern talking to. But book Tyrion, in his anger and hate, won't want mercy for the people who just enslaved him. He'll want revenge. Book Daenerys also wants violence. All through Book 5, she tries to rule Meereen peacefully, making compromises, marrying Isdar, chaining up her dragons. But peace fails, so she flies off on a dragon, and she has visions reminding her that she is the blood of the dragon, that Meereen is not her home, that the Targaryen words are fire and blood. Daenerys is done with peace. She's set to burn her enemies. And Daenerys once said that if Yunkai attacks her, she will raze their city to the ground. So Daenerys and Tyrion's first act together won't be this half-assed compromise. It might be to destroy...
God damn, this one looks like Shinobi.
George Martin says that Daenerys has embraced her heritage as a Targaryen, and that she and Tyrion are coming home. But it's a long way from Meereen to Westeros, and they have unfinished business in Essos. The Red Priests and the Widow of the Waterfront want Daenerys to free the slaves of Volantis, which might get violent. A priest prophesies that Volantis will burn. And conveniently, the ruling slavers of Volantis live inside the Black Walls in the heart of the city, making them a convenient target for Daenerys to roast them all with dragon fire. Macquarie may convince Daenerys of her destiny to be a sword of fire that will cleanse the world, pushing her further towards violence. Daenerys also has business in Pentos, because the captain of the Windblown, the Tattered Prince, joins Daenerys on the condition that he gets to take over Pentos. Daenerys hasn't agreed to this yet. At first she says she won't give Pentos to Tatters because Illyrio lives in Pentos, and Illyrio is her trusted ally. But Tyrion can tell Daenerys the truth, that Illyrio has been lying and manipulating her all along. Illyrio really supports Aegon, and while Illyrio was selling Daenerys to the Dothraki, he was raising Aegon in secrecy and safety. Tyrion could convince Daenerys to burn Illyrio for his betrayal, and to give Pentos to the Tattered Prince. We don't know what Tatter's plans are for Pentos, but it's probably something bad. Tatters has history with Pentos, and he's a cruel and brutal man. One time, Tatters cut off a guy's foot, then forced him to eat it, and then made him his cook. That's the sort of guy Tatters is, and Daenerys and Tyrion might give him the city of Pentos. So there are strong hints in the books that Daenerys' journey across Essos will be violent and destructive, bringing fire and blood across the continent. Will Tyrion encourage this violence, or will he tell Daenerys to be more peaceful? Tyrion's peaceful, compassionate side is represented by his relationship with Penny, and in his latest chapters, he rejects her optimism pretty harshly. He slaps her, tells her to stop dreaming, and to face harsh reality. There are even
There we
hints
go.
Tyrion might hurt Penny. Tyrion dreams of shooting Penny with a crossbow, and there's a weird, dark moment when Penny reminds Tyrion of Shay, and he's overwhelmed with rage, and Tyrion thinks about killing Penny. If Tyrion kills Penny, or just rejects her, or loses her somehow, that could be the breaking point that leads Tyrion to fully embrace Daenerys' bloody conquest. And Tyrion might develop a connection with Daenerys' dragons. Tyrion has always been fascinated with dragons, so he's read a lot of books about them. And this knowledge is considered so valuable that Jon Con makes him write down everything he knows about dragons in case it's useful. So this knowledge is another way that Tyrion can help Daenerys, because Daenerys doesn't actually know that much about dragons. She has a lot of trouble controlling hers in books. They keep disobeying her, eating children. They didn't come with a manual. So Tyrion might help Daenerys control her dragons, maybe even breed them, or design dragon armor, or a dragon riding saddle, like the saddle he designed for Bran. And maybe Tyrion will ride a dragon himself. He does dream of riding a dragon and burning his enemies, and author George Martin has hinted that Tyrion will fly. Daenerys believes that her 3 dragons need 3 riders. Jon Snow will probably ride one, like he does in the TV show. He rides the green dragon, Rhaegar, who was named after his father, Rhaegar. Daenerys rides the black dragon, Drogon. So Tyrion could ride Viserion. Viserion is colored white and gold, and his blood is gold and red, which fits Tyrion's Lannister colors. At the end of his latest preview chapter, Tyrion dramatically picks up a white dragon Sabas piece, which hints at a connection between him and the white dragon Viserion. Usually, dragons are only ridden by Targaryens, people with the Valyrian blood of the dragon.
So this sounds like a super deep V.
Or is he? There is a theory that Tyrion is not the son of Tywin Lannister. He's actually the son of the Mad King, Aerys Targaryen. Because for years, Aerys was sexually interested in Tyrion's mother, Joanna Lannister. It was rumored that he took her virginity, and that she was his mistress for a while. At Joanna's wedding to Tywin, Aerys joked that he wanted to have sex with her, and he took liberties at the wedding. Aerys' wife complained that Aerys was turning her ladies into his whores, so Joanna went back to Casterly Rock for a while. But then, the year before Tyrion was born, Aerys and Joanna were both at a tournament in King's Landing. Aerys made comments about Joanna's breasts, and Tywin got so angry that he tried to resign as Hand. And the next year, Tyrion was born. So maybe at this tournament, Aerys had sex with Joanna and fathered Tyrion. Being a Targaryen could explain Tyrion's pale blonde hair, which looks more like the Targaryen silvery blonde than the Lannister golden.
And here we go.
Tyrion's
More shoulder pads.
His Lannister mother, and his black eye could actually be a
Man, she
very
kept giving her
dark
these
Targaryen purple.
really
Targaryen blood could explain why Tyrion doesn't catch grayscale or the bloody flux, because Targaryens tend not to get sick. It could explain Tyrion's dreams of dragons, which are common in Targaryens, and Targaryen blood
Ooh.
let Tyrion ride a dragon. In Book 5, Daenerys' dragons like Ben Plum, and Tyrion explains that this is because Ben has some Targaryen blood in his family tree. Maybe the reason this is mentioned in the book is so that when Tyrion meets Daenerys' dragons, they'll like him too, hinting that Tyrion also has Targaryen blood. And then Barristan, who was Aerys' guard for years, could reveal that Aerys is Tyrion's father. It all fits. The white dragon, the timeline, his appearance, his dreams. Tyrion could be a Targaryen. But does the story really need another secret Targaryen? We've already got Jon Snow probably being a secret Targaryen, and young Griff being a secret Targaryen or a Blackfire. Do we really need all 3 main characters to be Targaryens whose mothers died in childbirth, who ride dragons? And if Tyrion is Aerys' son, what does that mean for his relationship with Tywin? The whole point point of their relationship is that even though Tywin hates Tyrion, Tyrion is just like Tywin. Tyrion is Tywin writ small. Isn't that ruined if Tyrion is actually Aerys' son? You could argue that even if Aerys is Tyrion's biological father, Tywin is the father who raised Tyrion, and his shitty parenting made Tyrion who he is. It's like how, even if Rhaegar is Jon Snow's biological father, Ned Stark is the father who raised Jon and made him the person who he is. And it kind of makes sense if Tywin always suspected that Tyrion was Aerys' son, because he does say that Tyrion is not his son, but that he just cannot prove that Tyrion isn't his. Because there is no proof whether Tyrion is a Targaryen.
Biker gloves again, with the knuckle.
Maybe that ambiguity is the point. Maybe we'll never know for sure. Like maybe Tyrion will start to develop a connection with Viserion, but then Viserion will be killed or taken by Euron before Tyrion can fully explore his Targaryen side. Maybe he'll always question his identity. Is he a Lannister or a Targaryen? Tywin wanted the same thing. He was never quite sure if Tyrion was his son. He didn't want to believe that Tyrion was his, because Tyrion was a reflection of everything Tywin hated about himself. It's because Tyrion is so much like Tywin that Tywin denied Tyrion was his son and preferred to believe he was Aerys' instead. But Tyrion, unlike Tywin, could face the truth that it doesn't matter whether Aerys is his biological father. Tyrion was raised as a Lannister. His personality and values were shaped by Tywin, so for better or worse, no matter what's in his blood, Tyrion is Tywin's son. And besides, George Martin has hinted that the third dragon rider doesn't necessarily need to be a Targaryen, so maybe Tyrion could ride a dragon either way. But the other thing Tyrion needs to resolve are his feelings about Tysha, his pain and his longing for his lost love. Will he ever find where whores go? George Martin has said that we will find out where whores go, so where? In Bravos, Arya meets a sex worker called the Sailor's Wife. Before she has sex with men, she always marries them in a fun temporary ceremony with a drunken priest. Like how Tysha married Tyrion in a fun ceremony with a drunken priest. The Sailor's Wife likes singing, like how Tysha used to sing for Tyrion. And she's a whore, just like Tysha was supposedly a whore. The Sailor's Wife is a fun and kind person, though there's something sad about her too. She often prays for her first husband.
It's almost like this is supposed to be like a metal arm or something. I don't know what's going on.
Was Tyrion, and the Sailor's Wife is Tysha. She could have fled from Westeros and set herself up in Bravos. And thing is, the Sailor's Wife has a blonde daughter called Lana. Lana is 14 years old, and Tysha and Tyrion were married either 14 or 15
Yeah, like maybe she's even missing the arm. Maybe it just doesn't exist.
Could be Tyrion
I don't know.
Lannister's daughter with Tysha. There are problems with this theory, like the Sailor's Wife says her husband was a sailor, and Tyrion's not a sailor, so maybe her husband was actually Tyrion's uncle, Aerion. But the sailor thing could just be a lie that she tells to protect herself. The other thing is that a fortune teller says that the Sailor's Wife's husband is dead, and if he comes back to her, it will be as a corpse. Tyrion isn't literally dead, but he does think of himself as being metaphorically dead, having died in King's Landing and become a ghost. So if the Sailor's Wife is Tysha, maybe he will come back to her in Bravos. Daenerys and Tyrion could stop there on the way west. Maybe Daenerys could borrow money from the Iron Bank or fight the Faceless Men or something. But Tyrion and Tysha's reunion may not be a happy one, because Tyrion and Tysha aren't the innocent teenagers they remember each other as. Tyrion has become a corpse, a hateful, murderous version of the boy he used to be. And Tysha has ironically become a whore, which is what Tyrion always feared she was. If a reunion with Tysha goes badly, and they don't meet each other's impossible, idealized standards, that could push Tyrion into an even darker, more destructive place, right as he arrives back at Westeros. So in the next book, Daenerys will carve a bloody path across Essos, with Tyrion by her side. Tyrion might ride a dragon, he might reunite with Tysha, and he might lose or kill Penny. The Winds of Winter has the potential to be Tyrion's darkest book, where he fully embraces fire and blood. At the end of the TV show, Daenerys burns King's Landing, killing thousands of innocent people out of anger and frustration. And a lot of viewers complained that this terrible dark turn happened too suddenly. There wasn't enough build-up and exploration of why Daenerys would do something so evil. In the books, her journey across Essos could be that gradual build-up of destruction. Her allies and advisors in the books will be violent, fiery people like Tatters and Ben and Maquaro, the Ironborn and Dothraki, and Tyrion, the devil on her shoulder, urging her to burn Westeros for his revenge. The situation in King's Landing will be different. It might be Aegon, not Cersei, who has the throne, possibly in alliance with Dorne, the Reach, and the Faith. And Aegon may be popular with the common people. There's a vision of the Mother's Dragon amidst a cheering crowd. If the common people support Aegon instead of Daenerys, Daenerys may see the people as her enemies. John Connington could be there, and interestingly, John Conn has a traumatic backstory involving bells, which might be the reason for the bells that ring in the show before Daenerys burns the city. There could also be wildfire in the mix. Cersei and Jaime might be there, perhaps as prisoners of Aegon, and a spark behind the fire could be Tyrion. Because King's Landing is where Tyrion was betrayed by Tywin, Cersei, Jaime, and Shae. It's the city he fought to save before its people rejected and condemned him. He said that he wished he had enough poison to kill them all, and ever since he's wanted revenge to pay his debts. During Robert's Rebellion, Tywin brutally sacked King's Landing, killing men, women, and children. And part of the reason why he did this so savagely was probably to get revenge on King Aerys and everyone else who mocked and disrespected him when he was Hand of the King. Now Tyrion is set to repeat history and to attack that same city because of how he was treated when he was Hand of the King. Tyrion will repeat the sins of his father. In the show, Tyrion tells Daenerys not to burn King's Landing, but in the books, he could encourage or manipulate her into doing it, by turning her against Aegon and the common people, or by not telling her about the dangerous wildfire, or even by starting the fire himself on a dragon of his own. However it happens, the burning of King's Landing would be the ultimate expression of all Tyrion's hatred and pain, especially if it kills Jaime and Cersei. But revenge won't make Tyrion happy in the end. In Book 5, he has a dream where he fights a battle with dragons overhead. He kills Tywin, and he kills Jaime, but then Tyrion realizes he's crying. As Ilaria says, revenge doesn't fix anything. It doesn't bring back what you've lost. A skull can't make you happy. In the show, Tyrion walks through the ashes of King's Landing and cries over the bodies of Jaime and Cersei. The tragedy in the show is that Tyrion fails to protect his family. But in the books, the tragedy could be that he killed his family and only realized it was a mistake when it was too late. In the show, Bran makes Tyrion Hand of the King and says he'll work to fix his terrible mistakes. But Tyrion's terrible mistake in the TV show was believing in Daenerys, who turned evil despite his good intentions. It could be so much more tragic in the books if Tyrion's mistake is encouraging Daenerys' violence, choosing hate and revenge. So, will Tyrion end the series as a villain like Tywin? Or could he redeem himself? In the show, the White Walkers are defeated, then King's Landing burns. But in the books, it might be the other way around, because Jon killing Daenerys makes more sense in the context of the White Walkers because of the Azor Ahai story. So maybe after Tyrion and Daenerys burn King's Landing, Tyrion will help defeat the White Walkers. He could finally realize that saving the world is more important than his politics and revenge. The Night's Watch were right. This is what he should have been doing all along. When Tyrion stood on the wall in Book 1, he felt something. He sensed that the White Walkers were the true enemy. He could help them by riding a dragon, maybe, or just help politically, by building alliances with the Starks. Tyrion Tyrion and Jon still think of each other as friends, and Tyrion has relationships with Bran and his wife, Sansa. So maybe Tyrion will team up with the Starks and redeem himself by saving the world from the White Walkers. Or maybe that's too much of a happy ending. Maybe Tyrion deserves punishment. Characters talk about cutting out Tyrion's tongue 8 times in the books, because Tyrion constantly annoys people with his jokes and insults, and his words cause so much trouble. Removing someone's tongue is a common punishment in Westeros. Euron Greyjoy often cuts out people's tongues, and he's becoming a major bad guy in the books. He might take Tyrion's dragon Viserion, and then take Tyrion's tongue. Cersei is another possibility. She hates Tyrion, and she's been talking a lot about cutting out tongues lately. And Tyrion losing his tongue would fit a pattern with his siblings, because each of the Lannisters lose the part of themselves that gives them power and pride. Jaime loses his hand that made him a great warrior. Cersei loses her image as a proud, beautiful queen in her walk of shame. And Tyrion's power and pride is in his sharp, witty tongue. So if he loses his tongue, all 3 Lannisters will have lost their most important part. When Jaime loses his hand, and Bran breaks his back, and Arya loses her sight, these are challenges that force the characters to grow and redefine themselves. But Tyrion has kind of already had his downfall. He's already lost everything. So losing his tongue might not be about growing his character. It could be more of a brutal final tragedy at the end of his story, a punishment for all his crimes. Because if Tyrion's words and lies convince Daenerys to burn King's Landing, maybe King Bran will take Tyrion's tongue so his words can't do evil again. He could live out his days as a quiet lion at Castle Rock, or as a mute maester at the Citadel, or with the Night's Watch. Tyrion remembers that Jon Mormont said that they need men like Tyrion in the Watch. Tyrion remembers that the Watch welcomes outcasts and misfits, no matter their past crimes. Maybe with the brotherhood of the Watch, Tyrion will finally find the family and acceptance he's always wanted. Sam says that someone really needs to sort out the books in the Castle Black library, which will take years of work. But Sam will be busy being Grand Maester, so maybe Tyrion will sort out the books of the Watch. Tyrion's first chapter begins with him reading a book. That was always his comfort and his escape. So maybe the series will end with Tyrion reading a book quietly. So is Tyrion Lannister a villain? From the beginning, Tyrion felt unloved and rejected. So he used political power to try to earn some respect. But then he was betrayed and condemned by all the people closest to him. Tyrion falls deep into despair and hate and dreams of revenge. In the next book, he may embrace fire and blood. He might spark the burning of King's Landing, but he might also help save the world from the White Walkers. Tyrion is villainous. He is a hateful, ruthless murderer like his father. But he is also heroic. He's sometimes kind, protective, and brave. George Martin did once call Tyrion a villain, but he more often calls Tyrion morally grey. Martin writes about the human heart in conflict with itself, and no one's heart is more conflicted than Tyrion's. There's love and hate, good and evil inside him, and to be human is to look for the light. If you want the real story of Game of Thrones, you've got to check out the books, the main series and the prequel stories and the history books. You can get any one of these on audiobook for free right now at audible.com/ASX. Sign up for a Premium Plus trial membership and you get an audiobook to keep, even if you cancel the trial. You could get Dune or Wheel of Time or The Expanse. Membership also includes unlimited access to thousands of audiobooks and shows in the Audible Plus catalog. Sign up at audible.com/ASX or text ASX to 500 500. There's still more to say about Tyrion, so there'll be a Q&A live stream on this channel in a few days at the link below. Also, AltSwiftX has released a rap about Tyrion for some reason, so you can check that out, but don't encourage him. Thanks to the artists and fan essayists linked below. And thanks to the patrons, including Kiara and Karth, Eli Lukia, Jay Bulk, Michelle, Dan Marks, Mally Brossard, Lady Diana, Callie Habimaki, and Carla Lindemann. Cheers.
Alright. Do I have anything else playing? Real-time animation, unlocking story and style. The Pulse of the Unreal Engine. I guess I'll just let that rock. See, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Like I said, everything's in Japanese, so you don't really see, but it looks like she has these gauntlets. You know, this thing here.
I'm Dan Sarto, co-founder, publisher, and editor-in-chief of Animation World Network.
And they're like devices that
Panel of top animation industry experts to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and that's animation. More specifically, the animation production process, from concept to delivery, driven by real-time game engine technology. So why is this important? Why are we all here today? Well, right now, some of the most compelling and innovative animation being produced in practically every area of entertainment, from shorts to series to feature films, uses real-time animation, game engine, and motion capture tools that are part of a wave of brand new production methodologies. More and more studios and creative artists are exploring, testing, and fully implementing these new tools, which represent a real paradigm shift in entertainment development. Game engines have been around for years, and they've been crossing over into film and TV for quite some time. It wasn't that long ago I first started hearing about game engines being used on special projects in the previous world that eventually made their way into state-of-the-art virtual production pipelines on films like War of the Planet of the Apes and Rogue One, and episodics like Game of Thrones and The Mandalorian. We've certainly heard of recent uses of game engines to drive cameras on sets using LED walls, like George Clooney's recent Oscar-nominated Midnight Sky. But what about animation? Why are we hearing so much about game engine technology and real-time tools converging with film and TV production? I think it's safe to say we're beginning to see an explosion of work using this technology to power.
even looks like her boots have swords on them.
With artists embracing brand new ways to design, rig, layout, animate, light, and render their work. The traditional
Like a bayonet. That's right, because her name is Bayonetta, so the bayonet had to have been
that clear the way for fast, collaborative
the idea, so it looks like that's like a bayonet coming off of the boot.
Let's first meet our experts. David, why don't you lead off and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Dave Prescott. I am the head creative SVP of creative production at DNEG Animation, and this is our first foray in animation into real time.
Jason, what about you?
Which means those would have
Vice President of Digital over at Brown Studios.
rotated outwards. And I see that these guns flip out some way.
Hi, I'm Kevin Dart, and I'm the creative director and founder of a small animation and design studio in Los Angeles called Chromosphere.
And Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Dupolo with Unreal Engine. Excited to be here today. At Unreal, I'm creating spaces and opportunities for artists relative to real time.
It's a pleasure to see you all here today, and let's kind of dig into it. David, I'm going to start with you. Why now? Why is this explosive convergence happening now? And what are the practical and more strategic benefits?
I think it's been coming for a while. I think filmmaking from day one, from the very first films ever made, either live action or animation, have always been about using new methods and technologies, right? And I think that the animation industry has gone through these changes over the years from, cell to CG to everything, and something always happens within that where either technology comes along or a filmmaker pushes something. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is find more time for the storyteller to tell the stories. And so as this kind of game engine technology enters the world, it allows you to start to adjust the paradigm of animation and where you spend your time. At the end of the day, if you've got a 10-month cycle on some production, is there a way we can use this technology to not reduce that time, but move more of the time to the filmmaking and rather than just pushing data around.
So what you're saying is it's really being pushed by just trying to
here-
increase people's ability to be creative.
For us, that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to find a way, how do we enable our staff to always say yes to filmmakers? Right, so what do we do with that? And can we use this tool set and readjust the paradigm of animation going forward? So what this allows us to do is to work and embrace different kind of filmmaking methods and being a lot more collaborative. So instead of this linear pipeline of you have storyboard, then you go into layout, and then you go down, how do you bring those people together? Because filmmaking is a collaborative business, right? If you're in live action and you're on stage, there's 50 people that are trying to make the best image possible. But we silo this in piece by piece. And this way, for us at least, in the way we're approaching this, is can we get more people into the engine together to interact, to get out those happy moments, those incredible kind of feats of like, oh, but if you just tilt the camera that way, if you just adjust this. When it's so linear, you really are restricting the filmmaker
So weird.
to when they can make what notes. For most of animation and CG animation, the filmmaker really gets to somewhere around 50% of the lighting. And that's when they first really actually see what their film's going to look like. You know, they go through layout in a rough version, they go through animation, but it's not really lit and this, and now they finally see it in lighting, and they would have made different decisions back in the kind of layout phase if they had known that. And so if we can compress that and give them real images as front end as possible, they will make different decisions in their filmmaking process, and that's what we experienced on our short. Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat is a short done by DNEG Animation and William Joyce. It's a silent film set in 1927. Mr. Spam is a budding engineer and visionary, but his job at the Hammers to Heads factory has really kind of destroyed his life and stuck his hat on his head all day. It thwarts any of his cheerful visions and memories of becoming realized. He lives next door to this lovely, talented, surrealist painter named Dot. She creates lively, ingenious paintings for Mr. Spam and just gets it to him just in the nick of time. And it's all about love, daydreams, and surrealism as they're unleashed on everybody's life. And it premieres in North America at the Spark Animation Festival.
Kevin, from your perspective, why is this convergence happening now? What's kind of pushing it to happen now? And what are the practical and strategic benefits for you and the work that you're doing?
Well, I would say from our perspective as a smaller studio, we like to take on projects with really small teams of multi-talented
So
people.
is this the
And
gun
so
muzzle, then the
we're
trigger
really
here?
excited by any sort
That's
of
still-
technology or software that makes the whole process more accessible, because the fewer specialized
And then the
skills
handle,
and departments of people you need, the smaller
gun.
the teams can be. So I think with something like Unreal, it makes it more feasible to consider doing something like a 3D film with a really small crew. I mean,
And then
crews
coming
are
off of the
really
handle
small
of the
studio
gun.
films with really small crews, where you really, I mean, you can do it with one person, just from start to finish, storyboarding and animating it and finishing it. But with 3D, I think until the advent of tools like Unreal, it's been harder because it's just
See, I love doing these studies because
and rigging and lighting and rendering all this stuff that
to see what kind of work went into making something like this, it's interesting to know, like, okay, so if I'm gonna make something, this is the kind of place where my mind needs to be
so we're always
creating from.
because
So
we just like
holsters like this, I kind of recall drawing things when I was working on the Frazetta study, and there was some holster weapons, or some holsters holding together some of the belts on some of the sketches that I did there. And then all the weapon studies that I just did is helping me understand, like, oh, okay, yeah, so this is a gun, this is a handle, this is how the gun fits into the holster, things like that. And now it looks like, now that I'm remembering, oh yeah, Bayonetta is named after a bayonet. And seeing these weapons here and not really knowing what they are, it's like, oh, right, this is a bayonet, which means like they thought maybe sticking bayonets onto her guns, just like bayonets used to stick to the end of like rifles and muskets or whatever. But these probably like flipped out, folded out.
As a tool set, because for a long time there was a gap there where You know, sometimes you leave a set and then not see a result until 6 months later. And now that the tools are available and that are lighting properly, displaying your character in its fully realized form at an earlier stage, it just enhances that creative process. And I think it's our job as facilitators of this technology and as people that are also really, really passionate about this technology to
Yeah, it's actually kind of dope.
transition from linear workflow
Probably need the
into a more collaborative
blade to kind of go in like that, so you have space to put the fingers to hold the
environment.
gun in the first place.
You've been
But
producing
yeah,
with some of the most sophisticated animation production studios and pipelines that have ever been created, including feature films and virtual reality and Google Spotlight stories. What's your take on this?
Well, I would have a bit of a mantra that is that I actually stole this quote from a woman who's the creative director of the Harlem Museum, and it is when I have questions, I go to artists, and I think that's a great umbrella for sort of what we're talking about, because I think that when artists have questions, they go to their art. When and that's where all this great collision is that I think everyone's sort of referencing. And in the real-time space, going from like a very traditional this happens space, very gatekeepery, going into real time and inheriting sort of the legacy of games, but also inherited is that legacy of collaboration and that legacy of iteration. And you've got this momentum of curious artists and curious groups of people, and all of that is just colliding at this really wonderful time. And boom, we've got really great work going out there, and certainly it's because it's changed the pipeline. Certainly because it's going to change budgets and change everyone's approach. But it's also allowing that special thing, which is being able to iterate on a story, being inside of your show, inside of your characters, maybe even if you're using motion capture in this new way. And so all of that newness, I think the result of that is also going to be something new in the actual output and the product. Much like when we go from 2D animation to 3D animation, right? We learn new words, there's new vernacular, there's new approaches, new artists on the scene. I think this is as much of a shift. I think all those things will result as well. New artists, new vernacular, new projects. And for me, I always see myself as an enabler of that. I've been very lucky to kind of have that position in my life and, be able to offer that and get those answers hopefully going amongst the artists to those questions that we have.
Well, as trailblazers, so to speak, you lead the charge in integrating and kind of adapting technologies to show people how they can do it, which is part of what we're here to talk about. Kevin, I want to jump back to you. As you mentioned, you come from a more traditional stylized 2D production world. As an artist, producer, director, what does this new way of creating mean for you in your studio? What are the biggest shifts in thinking for pipeline and workflow, and how things used to be done to how they're done now? And how does this relate to your UP7 project?
So UP7 is a project we've been developing kind of on the back burner at our studio for a couple of years. It's a big mashup of all these kinds of things we love, like spy movies and monsters and action films and all this kind of stuff rolled into one. One of the big driving motivations behind it is we've sort of fallen in love with this really hyper stylized kind of 2D, 3D production pipeline at our studio over the years. And we wanted to do a project where we could really just sort of do everything we've ever wanted to do in a project, like throw in 2D effects and 3D scenes that are mixing 3D and 2D characters all together. And so we came across Unreal while we were already in production on the pilot episode we were doing. Karen introduced us to it, and at first I was like, I don't understand what this would have to do with anything. Like, we don't know how to use this. It's an independent project we're doing. It's just something that we're sort of guiding ourselves and having fun. And I thought maybe this project could actually enable a lot of the stuff that we're doing. Maybe our pipeline is actually perfectly suited for the Unreal Engine. And so as new as Unreal is for our studio, I think such a big team to do a stylized 3D project, or maybe the fact that it's all happening in one place means we can consider doing like more interactive projects that have these stylized looks, that like stylized 3D looks. And so what I think has been kind of maybe more of a sequestered, like high-end kind of 3D production that you needed like a big studio to do, and just sort of making that more accessible to other filmmakers and smaller teams.
Jason, I want to jump back to you. What does the engine-driven technology mean for you in your studio, and what are your biggest shifts in thinking for pipeline workflow from how things used to be done to how they're done now, and how is this relevant to your Fables project?
Fables is a reimagining of classical stories of tales of morality based off of Aesop's fables, told in a new light. We have an amazing cast, which will be released soon, but our narrator is Ricky Gervais. It's an 8-episode series, 30 minutes apiece, and it's going to be coming out soon. So I'll be honest with you, the initial thought of this was not welcomed with real open arms from the traditional animation set of artists. It was very, everyone was a little bit skeptical, and people weren't sure of it because it's a new way of thinking. It is completely taking a system that has been in place for decades and literally ripping out infrastructure and saying we need a brand new way to think about this. So it was a combination of the foresight of our CEO Aaron and the president of Brenda that were just on the same page that something needed to change in the animation space. You have a project that would last 4 years. You've had 200, 300 plus people at the peak of things, and it's just a lot. It's a lot to do. There's a lot of time that goes into a product, and they were so supportive when we came up with the idea of, okay, this is going to be not popular, but we need to rip everything out, take what we love about live action workflows, look at it from the million-mile high perspective. What do we love about live action? What do we love about traditional animation? What do we love about VFX workflows? Take all those highlighted bits. Don't think about the interconnectivity from that first step. And then place all those things on the wall and then figure out per project, per specifics of the project, which parts and modules you are going to use. And I think that's the biggest thing to keep in mind for the future is that for every single project, they have their own unique demands. And we want this to be just as accessible of a tool set to live action directors as it would be to VFX supervisors, animation directors, et cetera, et cetera. It shouldn't just be siphoned off to someone that is technically savvy because, art isn't like that. Art is expression. So how we really are trying to think about this is that this is really the next generation of filmmaker that are going to be using this.
I wonder if it's a
It's free.
one arm is a bayonet, one arm is a gun.
Create your own world,
I don't
your
think so.
own, environment. The only limitation is what you put on the page or what you come up with in here. I think it's very important for us to share within our community for that next generation of digital filmmaker and content provider.
Love that. Love that. I love how you guys are just blurring all the lines over there.
Very well put. Peter, I want to jump over to you. What about its ending? How does your new short, Mr. Spam Gets a New Hat, fit into all of this?
For some years now, our president, Tom Jacob, and I have been talking and mulling over, there has to be a better way to do this. We spend so much time and spend this. For me, when I got into animation from visual effects, I was so frustrated by that, like, asking directors to make these commitments on layout. And I'm like, what the heck is that about? And why are we lighting afterwards? Because that's backwards. You light something on set first, then you put the camera, and so there was a lot of backwards for me. And so for years, I was trying to find another way to approach it. And as I was going to DNEG, I had had a conversation with Kim McCreary at Epic, and I said, I really want to embrace this, and I want to find a way to bring the best, kind of like what Jason was saying, the best of both worlds together. And it's time to change this. Big projects are hard to really tear the rug out from underneath things.
So crazy.
You have a couple of hundred people on a project, etc., and you're going to take a massive risk on the production pipeline. what we set off with was what is this real time thing mean, right? What is real time? What does it mean for us? Can we completely change how productions are done? And so we approached it. What I wanted to know was, should you do this on a big feature? What would it mean? What does your staffing profile change?
So if I just start drawing it, what happens?
Can't we just put the director and a game engine? Like, can we connect him to a home console and he just watches dailies from the engine? Because you don't need to render it out if we can run it fast enough and like right down to the core. How does it change dailies? So with that in mind, I've been having a conversation with Bill Joyce for a while about wanting to do a project together, and I knew what his library was, and so I approached him. I was like, I know you've got a couple of shorts out there. Maybe there's one that could really push this technology, and we could finish this short.
You
and go,
see,
this is how
there's
we would approach a feature. So that was our goal.
the
Our
initial
goal was not
band.
to write,
That's
some new fancy
thick
piece
there.
of engineering,
Initial
although we had some
band.
really cool ideas on what we're going to do with that in Unreal. But ours was, how do you change production? How would you approach a big show? Like I said, what are dailies? And that's an interesting thing that happened to us, is
So weird.
we got to a
There's
point
like two
where
layers
there
going
was a
on.
few days where dailies just weren't going well. And we were like, what's going on? This is not really working. So I called Bill and I had a conversation with him, and I'm like, what's up? It's just, something's not gelling. And what it was he was seeing animation, clothing, and lighting in real time, and while he was making comments, people were moving lights around and everything. And as a director in animation, just was not ready for that. Like, you're just not used to it. And so it took a moment for us to go, okay, let's approach dailies differently. And so we just had to rethink that. And Bill had to change the way he worked with us, because he just wasn't used to that. And so those kinds of things are what we went to look for, right? Which, that was our kind of purpose of it. And now as we go forward, a little bit of what Jason mentioned, we're looking at this tool from multiple platforms. Obviously the layout front end, it's just a done deal, right? That's where you should be using this, etc. But we have animation tools out there that animators have been
Now
using for
this
a very long
kind
time.
of cuts in that
Motion
way.
capture pipelines and all these
And
kinds
this
of things.
pops out, so
And
it's a
so for us,
separate piece.
It's really approaching each project the right way around. I have always had the philosophy that you use the right tool for the job. So we're not going to start
Oh.
jamming projects into Unreal if they're not the right project and it's not the right tool for that project, because that's the same way. So for us,
So it's
we
like
want
this
to
bottom one closer
finish
to the
project
wrist.
with as many yeses as nos, right? We wanted to know the goods and the bads and the uglies of the whole thing. And at the end of the day, it's the bads and the uglies just do not compare to the amount of goods, and so we'll be a heavy
Is connected to this bottom
features and episodics for us for sure.
Karen, I wanted to
part of the
dive into
brace.
this now. Jason, Kevin, and David have pretty much just covered some of the most important and key issues framing the entire discussion.
And then this one over here is connected to the top of the brace, closer towards the elbow,
Draw the most important things from what they're sharing.
which could set up like a rotation
This real-time technology,
sort of function.
conceptual thinking that it takes, and the technical expertise, and the just go for itness that all these folks have, and everyone sort of in our community does,
Oh,
is
hold on.
super, super important. But at the end of the day, right, it's a tool, and I use this pen differently than you do, and so that's the wonderful thing about it. You might want to use it more front end. I'm doing a lot of work now understanding or thinking about other utilities of Unreal, like as a story tool, and how much it really allows you to iterate on your story, taking your story out of the page and putting it in real space and time, and that's a shift that changes everything. It activates completely different parts of your brain. So, but more directly to your question, what I'm amazed at is one, the generosity and active generosity of the community, but we've been able to also, help.
I don't know why this is set up this way. Like I said, if there's like a rotation function, sure,
Really different projects.
but I don't really quite see it.
Inside, of Unreal and doing it ourselves and making it perfect and then showing you the result. So warts and all, right? Take the tool, use it as you wish. say, well, let's go make it great and get there together. So I think that that's something I want everybody to really know. Like one of the reasons that connects all of this and these projects is because of that feedback loop, right? And because we're like, it's only going to be really great if out in the wild it can survive, and hopefully even beyond, right? Beyond just our linear filmmaking, beyond, to what's next, and to Jason's point about the creators of the future.
The one thing I'd love to touch on there, Karen, sort of touch on is it's about liberation, right? So you're liberating creative thought for us, and that's always these moments in filmmaking that have happened. It's like when the 8mm camera came out, and somebody could borrow their dad's camera and go and film little movies, and that guy turns around to be the next Steven Spielberg or whatever it is. The other part of this is it really starts to allow young filmmakers into it, right?
And then there's a
It's kind of like when the digital camera
third layer here, which is probably kind of like the rotation gears for it to like slide around her arm on.
gave access to so many people to photography, and as a result, photography got better because more people were doing it, more people were using it.
And it's before it's too late, right? It's when you can still iterate and you can still have some ideas, and maybe you're going to change a story beat or two, and that would be so.
So these are kind of like the armbands.
Cost, but like emotional cost too, right? So now you've got that flexibility.
The other thing is, what bringing people like that to the table is they're not just able to explain how they work in a slightly different kind of avenue of what we do, but they're able to really teach that to people and say, this is how I would light it, this is why, and the theme, etc. But also the feedback loop is
see
massively changed.
the
So instead of
depth
going,
of
well, I
it.
would kiss the cheek with that, and maybe this, that, the other, and then 2 days later seeing it and going, oh, I just blew 20 hours of artist time. But literally seeing it like, oh, that was a bad idea. And so, the other thing we can do is we can fail faster, right? So we can try and we can experiment and we can produce things. And I will say that one of the biggest problems we face is the fear of failure in our industry has gone away. In big studios, you have, there's this huge thing that you have to do, and you have to crank out so much foot per week, etc. And in the early 90s and the mid 90s, you went to work, we had no idea what we were doing. You just got a bunch of clever people together, and you just hoped that you'd crank out some cool images before that movie released. Well, now what we're doing is we're able to experiment like that. We're able to go and try and light a different thing, or try and do a thing, because we can turn it around so fast. And so what that does is artists and the technical crew and everybody has started to really just not be afraid of trying new things. And that is where filmmaking comes in, because for us, it was those moments where, the artist would give the director Bill Joyce what he wanted, but they would be like, but we did this as well, because it took, 3 minutes to do this version. And there are so many moments in our project which came from people just being able to try stuff and not worry that, they were going to bring the whole pipeline down doing it. I would love to know, Kevin, for us, we've spoken about how this has been like this revolution of lighting and all this kind of thing, but a lot of the work you do is really like design-based, etc. Have you found like it's changed the way you approach that phase of animation?
Yeah, I mean, from the time we very first started the short, we made in Unreal, we normally take a really storyboard-driven approach, and because we were working in Unreal, we took a different approach on this one that we'd never tried before, where before drawing any panels or anything, we actually just drew a map of the scene where we were going to be, and thought, okay, the character's going to start here and swim over to this place and jump around here, and all this stuff is going to happen around here. Like real like choreography, basically, kind of like actually filming this thing on like a live action set or something like that. We just never approached things that way. And so one of the things we really tried to bring into Unreal was the ability to make completely just emotion-based decisions on what we were doing. We didn't want the engine telling us, if you put the light here, it's going to end up looking like this. We're like, I'll tell you where I want these shadows to fall, and I'll decide how I want these highlights and these shadows, like what color I want them to be, or like I don't care if it's realistic or not. I want this thing fogged out like this. And we were just talking about it earlier today that every single shot we really did approach like a 2D design.
Yeah, so this is the outside,
I mean, we've never worked with a 3D software.
and then on the inside.
See
Oh.
lighting decisions happen in real time, and so we would just jump on these calls together, and the one person who's doing the lighting is just sharing their screen, and let's just try and move the light over here, change the color of that shadow, let's just saturate this thing back here, and I sort of just entered a mode in my brain as if I was working on a painting, but I could actually see them
See, I
make
don't
those
get it.
changes in
It's
real
like
time
this
and then
pizza
transform it
slicer
into a full
rotation
painting
thing
all of a
happening.
sudden. So it was really cool to finally just be able to kind of wrangle it in a way. Like I feel like anytime we approach a new software, it's always we're trying to wrangle it into to thinking the way that our brains think about design. And I thought it was really cool that Unreal has that flexibility that you are able to wrangle it and get it to a place where you can just make like real artistic decisions and just treat it like you would a painting. Yeah.
From your perspective, what does the future of this space look like? You know, are we talking about does transmedia now fit into this in some fashion? Where do you see kind of this all headed, and where do you see it headed for you and the work that you're doing? Jason, why don't we start with you?
Look, transmedia is obviously the hot ticket item that's on everyone's mind. When you create a fully CG project or an animated project, you have all these assets, and the fact that we're getting everything and to have an entire workflow that is inside and out of the engine, we knew that from the get-go from a production standpoint, and we knew that we wanted to create an open world environment so that it could be repurposed for gaming or whatever we needed it later to make a virtual backlot so that if we wanted to do a second season of Fables, for example, we could just go back and update a few textures, read the scripts, and go to our virtual backlot and reshoot an entire season with some new performances with half of the asset costs that aren't in the new scripts. So the way that we approach it is that when we build our environments, we just don't build facades. We don't just build the interior of Ted's office. We actually build the house, we build the exterior, we build the entire city block as a huge immersive environment so that we can come back to it later and possibly have ties into gaming or VR or any of those transmedia avenues that are definitely coming down the line. So I think it's important for the future for the studios, the producers, the filmmakers, the writers to be all on the same pages and understand that if this is the approach that you want to take, it can't be an afterthought. You need to understand from the get-go, from the first time pencil meets page, that you are going to either create an open world or a franchise that will spawn out into multiple avenues. And I think that's where the future of content, the future of multimedia, truly becoming multimedia, is headed for the future.
Before I ask the rest of you that same question, Jason, you brought up a good point. We've been hearing about transmedia for years now, and the creators have wanted to do it. The folks that are writing the checks for IP development and such, they want exactly what they need right now. Do you think that
See, like, I don't know if these things slide up and down or what.
can they embrace the dynamic need of creating these environments from a transmedia perspective? Do you think they're ready to embrace that now?
Well, I think one fundamental thing has changed from years ago when transmedia and gaming and all these franchises started going and now, and that is the engine. The fact that you can create environments, the fact that you can, I don't know what it is now, but over 15,000 usable Megascans assets to your disposal that are ready for the engine, and you can create entire Grand Canyon valleys and huge environments with one artist in a matter of a couple hours. Like that's the fundamental difference. Is that open world used to be this thing where it would be like, oh my goodness, there's no way. We need to focus our attention on one set, what's in the script, everything like that. But now, because Unreal and Epic ultimately have made it so easy to get to take all those Lego building blocks and start creating sooner rather than later, now is the time where I feel like it's just going to skyrocket for the future. So I think, to David's point too, in that same time frame, you'll probably get double, if not triple more, and multiple uses out of it because of this workflow.
David, from your perspective, where does transmedia fit into this?
I go backwards and see transmedia coming, and there are properties out there that are talking about it, using it. I wholeheartedly agree with Jason on building the world and then location scouting and just saying, you know, this is essentially kind of thinking of filmmaking as a game. Like, here's the game we built for you to go make a movie. You know, I have this idea that how we're going to be able to work within those space with directors. So transmedia is there in a way. Maybe I'm going to throw a bit of a bucket of cold ice on this. I struggle.
There we
with
go.
this if it works for a style like
Well, that's gonna be the end of this one. We got a little bit done. Where did we go? We started with this, kind of did the boot, did the collar here. That sprouts from her sprouts from her chest. Worked the side picture, trying to figure out how maybe the back worked, and then just figured out the back and just I kind of just surrendered it to the inside of this dress, if it matches, if the backside matches the front, you know, so that way it gets the wings coming out of the back just like that. And yeah, then we moved on to the next design. Wasn't much to it. It's pretty basic, just like some you know, you got a sleeve on the leg and then some boots that are laced on the inside, and then there's like some lace on the outside for a gun holster holder. Very basic though. Cool design. It's simple and it's not bad at all, but very simple. And you could tell that they were just like pushing ideas, you know what I mean? Just trying to get them out there and then see where they go. This one's a little bit more bikerish, has a lot of studs and things like that, and then these gauntlets which have like big functions to them. So clearly, like the idea of like guns on the heels were taken off, like it were here on the boot as holsters, but now it's like functioning holsters with possibly like a rotation thing. I don't know. It's all the notes are in Japanese, and I'm just kind of looking at the arrows and being like, okay, there's something going on here that does that. And yeah, it's funny. I don't know what's going on, but then once I start drawing it, it's like, oh, I could kind of see how this is that and that is this. So I don't know. Maybe, you know, there's some sort of sliding and rotation function in order for the weapons to be holstered and not holstered. You know what I mean? Like active and non-active weapon use. And then, yeah, just adding the bayonets to the guns, which I don't think were there, like in the final design. So, you know, they were just shooting things out there. But either way, got a ton done. I hope this is fun, or, you know, at least interesting to kind of look and see the ideas kind of coming and going. I spent a lot of time on the first one just because it was so intricate. You know, it's usually how things go in concept designs too. You throw out one major idea where you kind of throw everything and the kitchen sink at it, and then you're like, it's not good. And then you know, start to break the elements down one by one. Now that you got all the ideas out, it's like, okay, start. Okay, we want gun holsters. We like the lacing idea. Try more lacing. You know what I mean? And you start this, and it's like, okay, it's not enough. So then you take that idea, and it's like, okay, got the leather split down the middle. Add some studs for more detail. Make more interaction with the guns and gauntlets and boots and things like that. And it's like, okay, you can see how they start pushing ideas. And her hair is all different colors still in these designs and all different styles and stuff like that. So very interesting. There's actually a piece coming up that really shows where they started to play with the idea of her hair being a part of something. This is on the next page, so I'm a few away from this. Hopefully by tomorrow or in couple of days, I'll be able to get to this part where you see how the hair is like extra long. They're pretty close to the design. They're like, yeah, we're gonna stick with black and red guns, you know, little color candy magic stuff going on. You got the red, you know, and the tall ponytail and everything like that. But more interesting is how much the hair interacts with her body. They were like, okay, we're gonna get the hair involved in the actions. And you could see that she doesn't have the sleeves on her design just yet. And her final design, like she has the sleeves that kind of come off, and yeah, it is her hair in the final design, but it actually looks like a suit, like it's part of the suit, so that you could see like that's where these ideas started to form. And yeah, man, this is fun, man, to jump and kind of go through the steps and the ideas, because now I get to draw certain things and you know, overcome certain challenges, like trying to figure out this part, what the backside of that dress would look like, the functionality of certain things, and getting little gadgets and gizmos and all that other stuff. Anyways, I gotta go. So yeah, I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do some more of this. And other than that, man, want to thank anyone and everyone for watching. I'm G Mr. Drew. It's at G Mr. Drew on all social. Links are in bio, along with my website, gmrdrew.art. Check that out. Hit me up through there if you want, if you're interested in me doing some work for you. These are all just sketches and studies and things like that, so I know they're not really all that impressive. But yeah, man, I like to do finished work, you know, paintings and things like that. So hit me up. Check out my Patreon if you want to support me. Starting at $1 for regular, just general support. But starting at $3, you get commissions. $3 a month, you can get annual commissions of me doing character portraits and things like that for you. So if that sounds cool, hit me up. Let me know. Other than that, man, just thank anyone and everyone for watching these things. It's I really appreciate any and all support. Kind of had a rough week last week, and I'm just, you know, kind of going through recovery and figuring out what the next steps are in order for me to, you know, just continue. Just keep swimming, right? Anyways, love you all. Peace.